In other news, Stats SA is today expected to release the quarterly labour force survey for the first quarter of the year. While there was a slight improvement in employment last quarter due to seasonal hiring, economists are now forecasting a small decline in the current figures, reflecting ongoing challenges in the labour market. For more on what to expect, let's bring in Tertius Wessels, Managing Director at Strategy Labour Solutions, and joins us now via our video link. Tertius, lovely to see you. Thanks very much indeed for making time to speak to us. As I mentioned, economists are forecasting a slight decline in these unemployment figures or employment figures. What are the key factors do you reckon we ought to be considering?
So good morning, and good morning to the viewers, and thank you for the opportunity. Yeah, I mean, there are several factors that are ultimately going to influence the unemployment figures that Stats SA is likely to release for the first quarter of 2025. For the most part, we're looking at the South African economy, the GDP, inflation, and all these things are factors that indirectly impact on employment. And by now, a lot of us have come to know and understand that economic growth is ultimately essential for us in order to create an environment where business can thrive and can employ more people. And at this particular point in time, the GDP is only estimated to grow between 1% or 1.5%, which may be insufficient in order to absorb our growing labor force. As you've indicated already, we've had seasonal workers during the festive season and the last quarter of 2024. And with that work now going out the window, so to speak, and you've got this influx of new entrants, recent graduates coming into the market, it's very likely that we will see a potential increase in the unemployment figure. My memory serves correct, the overall unemployment figure last year already sat around 40.1%. So it remains a very big concern that this would increase now in the first quarter of 2025. And then, of course, one cannot negate the fact that there are other factors such as the global economic uncertainties, rising US tariffs that have been imposed, the potential loss of the AGOA agreement. All are factors that are potentially to impact us long term in 2025.
Yeah, we've obviously just recently heard of a deal between China and the US announced yesterday. I doubt that's going to have any bearing on the figures that are going to be released by Stats SA, but hopefully in the quarters ahead. I also spoke about the seasonal hiring that we saw in the previous quarter, and, as the name suggests, it's a seasonal. I wonder, to what extent do you reckon it's changed the broader employment picture in the country, though?
Yeah, if you look about it, seasonal work, it plays a significant role. If in quarter 4 of 2024, you would have seen that it was an improvement of almost 0.8% in comparison to the previous quarter, and overall, it contributed to the overall 2.1% that we have seen. So there can be no doubt that both the formal and informal sector contribute or play an integral role in as far as alleviating unemployment is concerned. And whilst our formal sector is by far means the majority contributor, we have to also focus on those informal sectors to see how we can potentially alleviate. But that is going to require reform of policies at the end of the day.
Yeah, structural reforms is the refrain that we've heard. I think it's quite safe to say for probably a decade, if not longer than that, in the country, and yet it doesn't seem to be forthcoming. In fact, as we listened to the wrangling over the budget over the past couple of weeks, there were a few voices saying, yes, the VAT is an important aspect of what we should be looking out for, but actually we need the kind of budget that will create the kind of economic growth that will ultimately start eating into these staggering unemployment figures.
Yeah, that's the only way you alleviate poverty. It's the only way you reduce your unemployment, is creating an environment where businesses can thrive. Yes, government, for the most part, is a big employer within South Africa, but it's no doubt that the private sector is predominantly responsible for creating the jobs that can deal with our growing labor force, because our growing labor force isn't going anywhere. A very scary statistics for me from last year was the amount of people that have almost given up on searching for employment, which continues then to also contribute towards the overall unemployment figure. And unless we change things and we drastically change them, that number is likely to increase, and it's going to paint a very bleak picture for us in 2025.
Yeah, and I think sometimes it's worth emphasizing that those people don't just disappear, right? Just because they're not in jobs doesn't mean they don't exist. The employment story in South Africa is often linked to the crime story, the poverty story, and so many other social ills.
Yeah, and it's up to government at the end of the day. You know, if you look at, we've got for the first time a government of national unity. It's a government, we're 1 year into this government. And whilst we have a very positive statement of intent that was entered into by the different political parties, unless they sit and they develop detailed policy frameworks as to how they're going to create or alleviate unemployment, alleviate poverty, etc., we're going to find ourselves in a situation where we're continuously seeing court battles happening, which detracts from what needs to be happening in this country for us to succeed.
All right, Tertius Wessels, appreciate your helping us think through the numbers and what they might potentially mean. Tertius is the Managing Director at Strategy Labour Solutions. Once again, thanks very much indeed for your time.